Unfortunately, it must be stated that a truce or ceasefire in Ukraine is not expected in the near future. It will not happen, and several factors indicate this. The Kremlin is not interested in this truce and still demands the capitulation of Ukraine. And the President of the United States of America shows no desire even to impose sanctions against Russia in order to force Moscow to sit down at the negotiating table and finally cease fire. Moreover, Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, stated that there are no signs of an imminent end to Russia's war against Ukraine. Russians are already coming up with new fantasies about a truce with Ukraine. For example, Lavrov called it a trap from the West and said that there would be no situation where first there is a ceasefire and only then a discussion about ending the war. Today, reports suggest Putin doesn't need Trump's approval, and the United States is preparing to withdraw from the negotiations. And the dictator made it clear that he's playing by his own rules and that Trump's role in this doesn't really matter at all. But Trump keeps insisting that, no, come on, Putin actually wants to end the war. You just don't understand yet exactly how. But it's already obvious that there won't be a truce, so let's discuss this topic together. I'm Alexei Pichi. Today is May 21st. Let's go over this step by step. Before we begin, as usual, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and be sure to leave a comment. Subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peci Newson, link in the video description. There we regularly post news as soon as it comes in. Let's discuss everything sequentially. Today, many experts have already spoken on this topic, saying that unfortunately there will be no ceasefire in Ukraine. The Kremlin does not need it yet. They are preparing for a summer offensive. Trump is not going to put pressure on Putin. He doesn't even want to impose sanctions to make Putin sit down at the negotiating table. In the United States State Department, they say that you can't even threaten sanctions because Putin might get offended and definitely won't want to negotiate. And according to many analysts, for example, I like the quote from the editor of the Politico portal, Jamie Detmer, who says that the Russian delegation in Istanbul at the negotiations with Ukraine did not just recall the war with Sweden of 1700 to 1721 for no reason, threatening Ukraine with decades of exhausting struggle. And further, I'll quote him, Putin imagines himself as the new Peter I. He even has a bronze statue of the 18th century Tsar in the cabinet minister's hall. And Putin probably believes that not only prolonged military actions will help him achieve most of his revanchist military goals in Ukraine, but also endless negotiations which weaken the desire of United States President Donald Trump to achieve a peace agreement. Well, and further, Detmer noted that the 2-hour phone conversation between Trump and Putin did not move the situation toward peace. But instead of getting angry at the stubborn Russian dictator, which the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was hoping for, which the Europeans were hoping for, the American leader, it seems, is ready to simply give up and even abandon his persistent boasting that he can bring the war to a resolution. Well, as Donald Trump himself stated the other day, quote, the war in Ukraine was a European situation and it should have remained that way. But the previous Biden administration firmly convinced us that we had to intervene. I will simply step back if there is no progress in peace negotiations, Trump tells us. Accordingly, if America really withdraws from the negotiations, it will cause laughter in the Kremlin. They will simply mock us there. They are already mocking Trump, and this will be in an even more mocking tone. Moscow's red lines have not shifted. They have not moved anywhere at all during these 3+ years of full-scale war. So, Russia will continue to wage war with the assistance of the Trump administration, which is not ready to put any pressure on Putin and is unlikely to support Ukraine militarily. And why should Putin have entered into any serious negotiations at all, if everyone? All they're threatening him with is that America will simply abandon Ukraine if a peace agreement is not reached. It's absurd to think Putin would suddenly go to negotiations after that. America is supposed to be applying pressure, but there are no sanctions, threats, or any action being taken. Trump says, no, you don't understand, Putin wants peace. But that's not all. But now even Europeans have started saying that there are no signs of the war in Ukraine ending soon, especially after the conversation between Trump and Putin. And as Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, stated, quote, there are still no signs that this war will end quickly. They are trying to achieve everything possible through diplomatic means. The offer of mediation by the Pope of Rome is the last earthly instance. In his view, the only remaining option is to hope that the Vatican can facilitate a constructive dialogue between the conflicting parties. The Chancellor noted that it is important for him that Germany plays an active, supportive and strong role. It's worth noting that technical negotiations between Ukrainian and Russian delegations are expected to take place next week, possibly in the Vatican. However, there's no reason to anticipate a breakthrough from them, as these are once again technical negotiations leading nowhere, just as in Istanbul. Moreover, the Kremlin is not only mocking Trump, but also becoming increasingly brazen. And Russia continues to refuse an unconditional ceasefire with Ukraine. Russia supposedly fears that during this time the West will arm Ukrainian soldiers. This was stated by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And during his visit to Yerevan, he met with the Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan. And after the negotiations, the Russian official stated that the ceasefire is supposedly needed by the West so that in a calm environment they can rearm Ukraine and allow it to strengthen its defensive positions. Well, and next I'll quote Lavrov. Now, when they tell us, let's have a ceasefire and then we'll see, no guys, we've already been through these situations, we don't want that anymore. This is said by a representative of the aggressor country, which unprovokedly attacks its neighbors and occupies their territory. He says, no, we don't want that. Trump responds, saying they want peace, so he won't impose sanctions. Then Lavrov complained that the West allegedly deceived Russia. In 2014, when a coup was staged in Kyiv during the Minsk agreements, and in 2022, when the Ukrainian authorities were forbidden to sign a peace agreement with the Russians, it wasn't a peace agreement, it was a capitulation. And then Lavrov made up that the true intentions of European leaders are revealed by their calls for the United States to strengthen sanctions against Russia. You see, unfortunately, with the help of this tool named Donald Trump, Russia managed to drive a wedge between Europe and America, between long-standing strategic allies. Unfortunately, this has succeeded, and we have to admit it now. And again, that's still not all. But in the Kremlin, they're becoming so brazen, especially after the conversation between Trump and Putin, that they're making it clear that Trump's role in this doesn't matter at all. I want to share a bit of information here that is being published today. Reports state that in a recent call with Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin essentially conveyed that he doesn't require any approval or support from the United States. There are more and more signs indicating that Russia is playing its own game independently of Washington and apparently on its own terms. After the conversation with Trump, Putin once again emphasized his long-standing version of the reasons for the war, allegedly blaming the rapid expansion of NATO. Meanwhile, in the United States, calls for distancing from the conflict are growing louder. GDUN says that this is not our war, practically casting doubt on the further participation of the United States in supporting Ukraine. UN stressed that if Russia doesn't move towards a peace deal, what actions will the United States take? They will likely impose sanctions and begin isolating this so-called country. No. He says that if Russians do not take steps toward a peace agreement, then the United States of America may withdraw from the diplomatic process and stop helping Kyiv. Nice threat. In fact, after the call with Putin, Trump's rhetoric also changed. If 5 days ago, literally a week ago, he was presenting himself as a mediator ready to organize negotiations between Zelensky and Putin in Turkey, now he is limited to a general call that Ukraine and Russia should talk directly as soon as they can. He even proposed the Vatican for negotiations, highlighting the United States' readiness to take a back seat. The latest event clearly demonstrates that Putin does not see the United States as a lever capable of influencing his strategic plans. For years, the Kremlin has been promoting a narrative to Russians about a war not just with Ukraine, but with the entire West, including NATO and the United States. And the period of Trump's presidency was associated with the possibility of slightly easing the sanctions pressure. But even in this case, the Russian leadership does not change its main stance. The war is existential and must end on Russian terms. Is Washington putting any pressure? No, it's not. Washington, in turn, has limited options for influence. The United States can increase sanctions, including secondary ones, as Donald Trump suggested. However, this risks damaging relations with India, China, and other key countries. On the other hand, easing sanctions without Europe's support is unlikely to work. And the geopolitical logic of Trump's policy does not imply any deep involvement in the war without clear benefits. But overall, the picture looks like Donald Trump is unable to carry out his own threats and is simply trying to step aside. Now Bloomberg writes that European leaders are disappointed and fear that Trump is abandoning diplomatic efforts to end the war. And they remind us that after a 2-hour phone call, Trump wrote on social media that Ukraine and Russia would immediately begin negotiations on a ceasefire. However, the United States may not participate in this. There was no mention of sanctions, no clear timeline, and no pressure on Putin. Although Trump addressed European leaders after the conversation, many are already disappointed by his inconsistency. After months of intense efforts to persuade Moscow to make peace, European capitals are growing concerned that the United States is simply washing its hands of the situation. And one high-ranking European official said that leaders fear Trump is abandoning diplomatic efforts. Another confirmed that Trump made it clear he does not intend to pressure Moscow with new sanctions and is backing away from his own ceasefire proposal. According to him, neither Kyiv nor the European Union allies support the idea of direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Quote, "Today it seems that we have returned to a much more long-term scenario in which Putin is buying more time for himself and his military. Putin has gained more opportunities, and a ceasefire and settlement seem more and more distant." Later, let me remind you, Trump made a contradictory statement saying that although the United States is not leaving the negotiations, he is considering such an option to leave after all, and adds that there is a certain limit which for some reason he refused to specify. He did not rule out new sanctions or additional weapons for Ukraine, but made it clear that he is definitely not in a hurry to do so. Quote, "I think something will happen, and if not, I'll just step back and they'll have to continue." As you know, Trump is attempting to distance himself from the conflict, claiming it's not his war, but rather Biden and Zelensky's. In short, we've returned to the point where the second term of the American president began. And it seems that after he failed to reach any agreement, he just wants to step back. But I suggest you think about it. Trump managed to sign an agreement with Ukraine on mineral resources in which no security guarantees are specified. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like.